Okay, so good evening, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome, Ajahn Jayasaro. We're honored to have you, to join us all the way from Thailand. So this event is hosted by our DRBU Spiritual Life, and we're truly honored to have Ajahn Jayasaro here to speak with us on how can the Buddha's teachings inform contemporary education. He's someone uniquely qualified to talk about that topic. And so our format tonight is going to be a little bit unique as well. It's going to be kind of Q&A to keep it a little bit more dynamic, where Ajahn Kovilo, who's also on the screen here, and myself will be co-facilitators. We will start out with maybe 50 minutes of questions from Ajahn Kovilo and myself, and then open it up for everyone to ask questions. So if people have thoughts during the kind of Q&A, please, you can type in the chat box. We'll keep track of it and then be able to ask questions later. We'll try to prioritize DRBU first and then kind of go with everyone else. For myself, I'll be asking questions kind of geared towards educators, faculty, staff, administrators. Many of us DRBU have really devoted our lives to trying to work on Buddhist education in contemporary times. And then Ajahn Kovilo is quite unique because he's actually a Thai forest monk for over 10 years, but he's also a DRBU student, a bachelor student, which I don't know if there's many. And so we're very fortunate to have him. And because he's here, he's also a student of Ajahn Jayasaro, so we were very fortunate to be able to invite Ajahn Jayasaro. And so we will just be starting out with some questions, but I thought maybe Ajahn Kovilo could introduce Ajahn Jayasaro because he's much more familiar with him. So I don't know if Ajahn Jayasaro, Ajahn Kovilo, would you be able to speak?
Yeah, sure. Ajahn, I'll ask permission I've practiced, it's under 2 minutes, the introduction, so keep it short. But yes, it's a great pleasure to have Ajahn Jayasaro with us here tonight, or this morning. As a short introduction, Ajahn Jayasaro was born on the Isle of Wight in England in 1958. After a Pan-Asian pilgrimage and much hitchhiking through Europe, Ajahn Jayasaro joined Ajahn Sumedho's community in England as a monastic trainee, and in late 1978, he traveled to Thailand to ordain at Ajahn Chah's monastery, where he took full bhikkhu ordination with Ajahn Chah in 1980. After years of practicing in various monastic communities throughout Thailand, Ajahn Jayasaro took up the post of Abbot of Wat Ba Nanachat, the largest monastery for international Theravada monks, possibly in the world, from 1997 to 2002. After his tenure as abbot, while he turned to a more solitary mode of living, he also became involved in Buddhist education, a passion and commitment he maintains to this day, serving as the direct spiritual advisor to several Buddhist elementary and high schools. Ajahn Jayasaro has authored numerous books, both in Thai and English, including the biography of Ajahn Chah in Thai and its revised English counterpart entitled Stillness Flowing, which is part of the DRBU curriculum. In 2019 and 20, Ajahn Jayasaro was honored a series of royal monastic titles by the King of Thailand, and in March of last year, he was granted Thai citizenship by royal decree. Ajahn lives currently alone in a hermitage 100 miles from Bangkok and has established a further 4 hermitages, which I had the pleasure of living in for about a year and a half in the surrounding area where his students reside. He teaches weekly at a nearby Buddhist high school and bi-weekly at a Buddhist elementary school and at the meditation center Bon Bun. Ajahn, if it was okay, could those of us who are so inclined pay respects with 3 bows? Okay, bow. Great to see you, Ajahn.
Yeah, it's raining.
Is it? Ajahn, if you wanted to start with a Namo, or Ajahn Jin Chuan Shur could just jump in with some questions.
That is something.
Okay.
Wait, I didn't catch that. Should I start with the questions, or were we going to have a invocation?
Yeah, Jin Chuan Shur, you can.
I can just start? Okay.
Yeah.
So good morning, Ajahn Jayasaro. I first wanted to say that I deeply appreciate you taking the time to meet with us this evening, at least here in America. And I've been personally quite inspired by your talks and writings, especially Stillness Flowing that Ajahn Kovilo just mentioned. And I thought maybe just to get the conversation started, would you be willing to share a little bit about how you began working in education as a Buddhist monk?
Yeah, from my first decision to seek ordination, I wanted to live as a bhikkhu in a Buddhist country, in a Buddhist culture, and in northeast Thailand, at least the monasteries are still very much embedded in the local society and culture. And so as you become more senior, then just by default, you start receiving invitations to teach, to begin with in the monastery, where there be groups of teachers, groups of school students coming to receive instruction. And from the late 80s, I was fluent in Thai language by that time, and started giving Dhamma talks and instruction in the local teacher training college and local university, and also in Bangkok. So I think that, given that our time and energy is limited, and there's only so much that we can apply ourselves to in any kind of productive way, that education is that which has always been at the heart of my life. And I think a real turning point in my own study and understanding of Dhamma was the coming to the conviction that the Buddhist teachings are essentially the most profound, comprehensive, and effective education system that the world has ever seen. And that I found it a real shame that there have been very few attempts to try to integrate the Buddhist vision and techniques of education of the whole human being with the government and indeed private sector education in Thailand. It seemed a huge opportunity being wasted. So I felt from my early years in Thailand a disappointment in how little Buddhist thought, Buddhist wisdom was coming to play in the development of the society and the economy, and felt that would be something that I would try to play a part in trying to remedy. So some years later, a student of mine who's a headmistress of a kindergarten school, and which then also opened a primary school extension, disillusioned also with what she could offer in her school. And that's when we first start to get together to talk about trying to develop the school along more specifically Buddhist lines, in the sense of applying Buddhist developmental principles to the school. So that was really, practically speaking, my first direct involvement with a school called Tosi School in Bangkok. Some years later, we developed a high school, a boarding school, which is just down the road from where I live now. And those are the two schools that I have most direct involvement with.
So that's wonderful to hear. Ajahn, I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about the 12 wise habits and the 4 areas of development. I may just show that on the screen for people who might not know. I was looking online and I saw very interestingly on the website from Panyaden that there's essentially 12 wise habits that are actually really Buddhist virtues around using the senses wisely, knowing the right amount, and then all these different areas. And I was wondering if you're willing to share a little bit about that with everyone.
Yeah, well, in fact, the inspiration to some degree came from a visit to America. We were thought it would be a good idea to look and see what was going on in other parts of the world, not necessarily in Buddhist education, although we did go to visit a city of 10,000 Buddhas as part of this trip. But we also visited a number of alternative schools, and one common theme that impressed me when in the schools that I was impressed by was that they tended to have a list of virtues or ideals of the school which were prominently displayed and which were on everybody's lips. And I thought that in terms of creating a culture for a school or an institution, this was a very skillful way of doing it. And so on return from America, I applied myself to going through many suttas and from them culling what I deem to be a number of virtues which would be specifically applicable to a non-monastic situation, and ones which would be useful both for the education in the school itself and then for the children to be able to apply in their adult life. So these are taken from some of the key teachings, whether it's the paramis or what we call the iddhipadas, the 4 roads to success. And it's not, of course, an exhaustive list of Buddhist virtues, because I think once you get over a dozen, it becomes too unwieldy and difficult to use as a means of recollection and as something which can guide a culture of an institution. So I set a limit at 12, and there are some obvious absences. I would say probably gratitude is the one that I've often thought, well, should I have put that in the group as well? But as I say, you have to draw the line somewhere, and it's not that we don't teach gratitude and filial piety, but they're not included in that list.
Would you be willing to maybe explain a little bit about the list? I put it in the chat box. So I saw there's the physical, the social, emotional, intellectual.
Yeah, that's a little bit different. So I'll maybe I should go into that first, what we call the 4 pavana, or the 4 areas of cultivation or education. And one of the difficulties we had certainly in the early days, that it was, you may think surprisingly, but quite a revolutionary concept in many ways to adapt an education system in lines with Buddhist developmental principles. And particularly we're working with an urban audience, urban group, parents. And these days, people in Bangkok, particularly big city life and quite secular in many ways. And one thing that I've observed over the past many years is that many of those who've been through a Western education or influenced by Western culture, which is everybody, I guess, these days, tend to look at Buddhism through Western eyes and particularly through Western ideas of what a a religion is. And so the idea that there is this thing called religion, and all religions share, a common feature that they are essentially belief systems. So the counter idea that I've been promoting for the last many years is that religions can be divided into groups or families of religions, and that Buddhism is not a member of the belief system family of religions. It shouldn't be referred to as a belief system or a faith, that it is a different kind of religion. It's an education system religion. And so looking at an education system religion as a form of belief system religion leads to distortion and all kinds of difficulties. So most people were looking at Buddhism as a belief system religion and assuming that a Buddhist school would essentially be replicating the Catholic schools, which are also already very widespread in Bangkok, simply substituting like Buddha rupas for crucifixes and so on. So, had to try to explain this in a way that could be understood with people who are not really devoted practitioners of Dhamma, but more culturally Buddhist. And the monk who I look to as a teacher and mentor these days, P.A. Puyuto is his name, Somdet Prabhupada. He's the person who is the trailblazer in this whole area and written a number of books, mostly in Thai language, on Buddhist education, very influential. But his idea was to base it on the threefold training, the eightfold path of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, which I think is correct, and I follow that. Because the threefold training is like just telescoping the eightfold path into three areas of study or training, but to use that as a framework for a secular, not exactly secular, but an education system for children who are not training to become monks and nuns is somewhat off-putting. Where many people are already a little bit worried that you're going to develop children who are so good and pure and kind, but completely unprepared for the dog eats dog, big fish eats little fish, cutthroat world in which they believe they live in. So yeah, I won't go into that. That's a whole different kind of conversation. But I found it would be better to try and find a different way of talking about the same thing. And so look through the suttas, and I came across this teaching on the four pavana, which is really the threefold training in slightly different terms. Sila is divided into two. So it's the cultivation of the human relation with the material world, and secondly, the human relation to the social world. So it's still, actions of body and speech, but divided according to whether the object is the material or social world. And then samadhi is referred to as citta, or the heart. So it's much easier to talk about the EQ, emotional development, etc., where use of the word samadhi tends to be misleading. People think it's just a matter of sitting with your eyes closed and going into refined states of consciousness. So it's really just changing the words, the branding, if you like, I guess. So 4 areas: education of the human or the child, student's relationship to the material world, to the social world, the development of the heart and the mind, thoughts, emotion, and then the development of wisdom. So now coming back to these 12 wise habits or Buddhist virtues, then there is some overlap but basically we say like for the first one, the human relationship to the material world, then the two most prominent here are taking care of the senses, or what's in Buddhist texts usually referred to as sense restraint. So I didn't want to present it in that sort of sense restraint way, which is, again, can be easily misunderstood, but saying we live in a confusing world where we're getting all kinds of information coming through by way of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So being mindfully aware and careful of what we allow into our hearts, our lives, by means of the senses. Studying, there is in fact a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya that you may be aware of, the Indriya Bhavana Sutta. So being taking care of an interest in what's going on, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then the second is Matanyuta, or knowing moderation or the right amount, and having some sense of questioning our relationship to technology, to all aspects of the material world, with this sense of how much is enough, how much is the optimum. So Matanyuta, or it could, I would say, is searching for interest in finding the optimum amount in terms of our relationship to the world around us. In the social side, then the first is non-harming, and non-harming is really short, is merely sila. In other words, how we relate to the people around us, using precepts, recollection of precepts as pegs, supports for mindfulness in our relation to the people around us, as the kind of the key, the essence of sila, if you like, is not harming oneself or others. Then I use that as the name for this virtue, is not harming. And then the next one is chaka, or generosity, and developing that generous heart and wishing to help and to support those around us. Then the majority of these virtues are heart virtues. I think in terms of education, particularly the first one, chanda, is central. This is enthusiasm, interest, passion in regards to study, but one's life in general, and developing that ability to develop, to take care of, or knowing how to inspire and uplift yourself when you feel down and discouraged. So intrinsic motivation, learning the skills of instilling and promoting and taking care of intrinsic motivation, chanda. Then kanti, the patient endurance, enduring patience, forbearance. The Buddha said the supreme incinerator of defilements, absolutely fundamental to success, I think, in any endeavor, worldly or spiritual. Viriya, Jaisu, sorry, that's Thai, isn't it? Sort of like perseverance, resilience, never giving up. And I was recently speaking to the teachers at the kindergarten and primary school, and saying, I think that, maybe we're stressing the kind of the soft, or the let's say more passive kind of virtues, or that's how Buddhist virtues are generally characterized. But I would like to see emphasizing the other side, the more active side, in particular this virya and perseverance, and so how all the teachers, whenever there's some kind of difficult thing come up in the school, everyone's getting there, and so just developing this is a kind of a slogan for the kids, we're Buddhists, we never give up, something like this. So what are we going to do about this? This seems difficult. We're Buddhists, we never give up, we just keep going till the end. So in instilling this in children from like 3, 4, 5 years old, so that it becomes part of their identity as a Buddhist. It's not like I'm a Buddhist, I'm cool, I don't lose my temper, I'm kind. But that's great. But also I'm a Buddhist. When I set my sight on something, I never give up. I just keep going. I'm tough. That kind of. So I think that's in isolation. Maybe that would be kind of a bit macho, but it's within the whole context of those softer, warmer kind of virtues. Then the Brahma Viharas as the basic emotional orientation towards the world around us, and knowing when metta is appropriate and compassion is appropriate, sympathetic joy is appropriate, upekkha, equanimity is appropriate, and then sati, of course, probably don't need to say much about mindfulness, so that's obviously super important everywhere, like the prime minister in every area of government, or in less healthy times, salt in every dish. That one can't really use that simile anymore. But mindfulness present everywhere. Ajahn Kobalo, is that all of them? Are you keeping track?
Did you go over Yoniso Manasikara? Is that the...
Oh, that's in the wisdom. So that's wisdom. Yoniso Manasikara is thinking skill, basically wise thinking. In the Buddhist context, but specifically, we divide it into two kinds: the kind of thinking which is aimed at reducing or eliminating unwholesome dhammas and promoting wholesome dhammas. For instance, if you're very angry, then thinking about the good qualities of somebody, the lovableness of somebody, and in order to counteract the angry and unkind, cruel thoughts, and then thinking aimed specifically at the way things are. For instance, the reflection are nothing's sure, or what arises passes away, and investigating, thinking about impermanence and dukkha and anatta. In a school system, then it's start off with basic good, healthy thinking skills, critical thinking, creative thinking skills, and so on. So this idea of trying to develop this idea that one of the things that you should look to be gaining from your education is the ability to think well.
Wow, that's super comprehensive. I definitely would want to have gone to your school when I was growing up. I definitely learned a lot of other things, I have to say. Maybe for me, the last question I would like to ask is something that I think is very important in our community, especially at DRBU, is something we call ethical sensibility, developing this kind of inner sense of maybe what's skillful and what's unskillful. I think in the Buddhist tradition, it's called Hiri Ottappa. It's something that I think you've translated as wise shame and wise fear. In our tradition, we are still working on a translation. It often gets translated from the Chinese as from 惭愧, I think, to shame and remorse. What happens, a lot of people don't want shame and remorse. And so I was thinking if you would speak a little bit about that ethical sensibility, and then maybe how a school would nurture that. Because that's something we're really wrestling with. How do we help develop that in the classroom and in our campus life and community?
Yeah, I put this prefix of wise for skillful, shame and fear. Although, as you know, they're not present in the Pali or the Sanskrit or Chinese words themselves. And as you say, I think particularly in Western world, maybe that there's so much confusion about what these words refer to, and particularly in distinguishing between shame and guilt, I think is a real challenge in America, and maybe in a way that's not necessarily the case here in Thailand. my view is that basically ethics, good behavior, kind, thoughtful behavior is just common sense, and that the clearer you see things, the more you understand life, then the better you behave. So I think this is where I start from. So I'm not in favor of saying you should, feel ashamed of yourself, or you shouldn't. I don't think shoulds and shouldn'ts work very well. Brings up a lot of, either people turn into sheep or else they become rebels, and they don't become good students. And I'm interested in encouraging people to see that if you ask questions about what does it mean to be a human being, or to be a good son or a good daughter or a good husband, a good wife, a good father, a good mother, a good citizen, or what do you think would be appropriate behavior to fulfill those kinds of ideas which are not being foisted upon you, but you're asked to come up with them yourself. And I think that the more you have a clear idea of good and admirable, inspiring behavior, and that's right in, let's say, right in the forefront of your mind. This is the important point, I think, that when you're in a situation where you're making ethical or moral choices, then that reflection pops up into your mind. And that's why it's called a guardian. The Buddha calls the Hiriotapa the guardians. They're the guardians because they question or they counter, and they say, "Oh, who goes there? That's in conflict with the goals that you aspire to, or your values. Are you really sure you want to act in a way which is betraying your values?" And I think that if that occurs, and you are basically, then the feeling that arises is what's called shame. So it's a sense of a inherent conflict between how you are planning or about to or are acting, and your values. Excuse me. As far as fear, it's a rational and wise fear. It's not it's not a foolish fear. It's a fear that comes from reflecting upon and going over cases from your own life or from people around you, of the consequences of actions. And when I think the lack of fear is really what we would call recklessness. So when you're about to do something and maybe you have this prick of conscience and say that's not a good thing to do, and you just say shut up, and you just go into overdrive, and that's what the lack of fear means. And fear means is when or wise fear means where you don't shy away or try and censor or just turn your back on your awareness of the consequences of what you're doing. And yes, this has consequences, and no, the consequences are not worth the pleasure that you may get from acting in this way. And so again, it's your choice, but it's right there, and it's basically, this I'm going to get a small amount of pleasure from this limited temporal amount of pleasure. And then I'm going to have to face some very unpleasant consequences. It's not worth it. That's this sort of fear of what happens if you're stupid enough to go ahead, is that wise fear. So in summary, reflecting wisely, it's yoniso manasikara on your values and on the consequences of actions. When put in the position where you are pressurized or tempted to act in unethical ways, those things spring to mind and they come to bear upon your decisions. So it has to be right there and then.
Okay, wonderful. Ajahn Kovilo, would you like to ask a few questions?
Yeah. I think I was thinking that kind of shifting the topic over to kind of questions about being a student and trying to be the best student that we can be. And one question which came to mind was about amongst those 12 wise habits, there's a quality of knowing the right amount. And I'm curious if you'd be able to like say anything about, how to discern the right amount with regards to 3 areas, which are a part of all of the students' life as well. I mean, faculty as well, but maybe specifically thinking about students is how to know the right amount with regards to sleep, to study time, and then to meditation or spiritual cultivation. How to balance that.
Yeah, I first of all, I don't think that there's that there's an answer that we can come to and say, now I've got this worked out, that for me, so many hours of sleep, so many hours in this, and that's it. I don't have to think about this anymore, because it's a dynamic thing, and it can change from day to day or from month to month, according to things like physical health and workload and all kinds of other factors. So it's a contingent thing that you're constantly having to reassess. It's not just something you can say, yeah, I got that one worked out. As far as the right amount, then I think it's always important that we recognize that the criteria that you need to make that kind of call appears when you are clear about your goal. So let's say in spiritual life, for like the Eightfold Path or the practice of Dhamma, then what is the right amount which is leading you onward to the goal? So let's say your goal is abandonment of greed, hatred, and delusion, and let's say you get very lazy for a period, and you're not meditating as much, you're not practicing as much. You realize that's the case, and then you might apply a short-term corrective, let's say by doing an all-night sit or doing something really goes against the grain. Now, if an outward observer might say that can't be the middle way, that can't be the right amount, that's just way over the top, that's tormenting yourself. But in the perspective and overall practice on the path to Nibbana, then a short-term corrective may well be needed. And it's not the way of practice that will take you all the way. But when you're straying off to the path to the left, as Ajahn Chah would say, you have to move to the right, even though moving to the right is not necessarily in the direction that you want to go. So everything has to be related to the goal. How does this particular practice relate to the lessening and abandoning of unwholesome dhammas and the cultivation and development of wholesome dhammas? The simile that that Ajahn Chah used to give, which I've always found helpful, is he said that it's as if we're rowing a boat across a very swiftly flowing river, and if you're an experienced oarsman, you know that you shouldn't set your goal at the jetty directly facing you, but you point your boat upstream a little, allowing for the strength of the current to correct the course and allow you to cross straight over. And similarly, when we are involved in any kind of activity which defilement is involved, which is almost everything, then we just got a little bit stricter, maybe, than would be the optimum, allowing for the corrective force of the influence of defilement. So it's skillful means of dealing with defilement. If we try, go directly as we feel would be just the right amount, then we'll end up less than the right amount. So we earn a little bit more than the right amount, assuming that it'll end up, hopefully, with the right amount. With schoolwork and academic work, that was the first one. Yeah, it's trial and error, basically, isn't it? I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any kind of general rule here. It's time management skills are important, as important as spiritual skills, and learning, that interest in learning from experience, and not making the same mistake twice if you can help it, pushing a little bit, but knowing when to relax. And it's more, yeah, it's there's no kind of fixed rhythm to it, is it? I mean, everyone's different, but it's more that sense of getting a feel for balance. And one of my favorite stories in regards to this is of the Aikido. Hello? Yeah, of the Aikido master, and the student says to Aikido master, all these years, I've never seen you lose your balance. It's incredible. And the teacher replied, well, I lose my balance all the time, yeah, but I regain my balance so quickly you don't ever see it. So I think that we all will lose balance, but it's the extent to which we are sensitive to that and reestablish balance and learn from it. With sleep, I would say, if you dream a lot, then that usually means you sleep too much, particularly if you dream in the morning before you wake up. That's just, if you're falling asleep all the time while you're studying, it probably means you're not getting enough sleep. If you wake up and you're irritable and agitated, probably too much sleep. That would be my guess. I'm in favor of short naps during the day, and I can do that because I live by myself. Well, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You know, we get up very early here in Thailand and go to bed quite late at night. But I find if I have like 15 minutes during the middle of the day, I just feel really refreshed. But again, that depends on whether you can do that or not, or in a school or college situation.
Yeah, thank you, Nanachat. I've got another question, which is probably similarly not that easy to give cut and dry answers to, but how about another one of the wise habits, which is using the senses wisely, and specifically with regards to like internet use? I mean, we've got, like, as students, we have to use the internet. We've got to do research, and basically we've got, you know, living in places that have Wi-Fi 24 hours a day. And do you have any thoughts about how, like, a practitioner can kind of put boundaries around their internet use, or any?
Yeah, I think first of all, I just feel grateful for internet. I mean, we can speak today because of internet, and you know me for many years now, completely impractical I am with almost every area of material world, and having YouTube where there are all these kind people who post YouTube videos and tell you how to do things properly. So I'm very grateful for the kindness and the dana this is the new field of dana, isn't it? Like YouTube, people putting things, sharing their knowledge about things in the world. But because it's so, it's not just one world, it's world upon world upon world, and wormholes, and yeah, I think it's probably most simple thing is before all else is to have time limits, and to keep a diary if you do find yourself wandering off into not so wholesome or helpful areas of the internet, to keep a diary of this and be very honest about it, where you've been, for how long you've been, and that's, I think that's helpful. But in terms of Dhamma practice, as you know, we have this, wholesome and unwholesome Dhammas as our basic go-to, and if things are increasing the value, the unwholesome Dhammas, whether these are laziness or distracted mind, and I think in terms of a test is, if our mind is in an unwholesome state, then the idea of meditating is really unattractive, rather off-putting. So if you think, oh, maybe I'll just go and meditate for half an hour now, or go and walk, and see what your immediate reaction to that is. And if it's, no, I've still got that to do, or this to do, or I don't really feel like that, then that's usually a sign that your mind's not in such a wholesome state. So it is central, I think, to all these areas, practices, that ability to be able to tune in to the mind, and to particularly in terms of whether the mind is wholesome or unwholesome, it's merit or demerit in the mind. So artificial restraints such as time limits and keeping close records of how you spend time, and then the less measurable means of keeping very close tags on the wholesome, unwholesome state of the mind.
Yeah, thank you, Ajahn. I think I'll ask one more question, but as I do this, maybe we'll open up the chat, and if people would like to just start throwing questions in there, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask Ajahn Jayasaro, then just write them in the chat box, and Jin Chuancher and I will kind of curate that. And if people want to be called on, we can call on you, and if not, then Jin Chuancher and I can also read those out. But maybe as a final question from my end, Tanajan, so I think most people who come here to DRBU are non-traditional students. I think that's a very fair thing to say in a sense. So all of us are coming here with a very pretty strong intention of really wanting to learn. That's the primary resolve in coming here. But of course, schoolwork can wear on you, and people can just get overloaded. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how to maintain or to stoke joyful, basically associating study and learning with being a joyful experience rather than it being a chore.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a choice between joy and drudgery. I think that probably it's more practical to find somewhere in between those two. But if it's a chore and drudgery, then there's always some vipawatanha there. So vipawatanha, technical term, meaning the desire not to have to do this, that it's not like this. So certain things, they're not fun, and it's very hard to, you can't be on a sense of joy and blissed out all the time anyway, but sometimes just a matter of being patient and just working away patiently. But what is very important is to prevent this negativity and negative thinking, in particular this all the negativity bound about, I don't want it to be like this, it shouldn't be like this, I wish it was somewhere else, something else. That's all the ways that the mind kind of struggles and opposes and resists things that I like this, so it's like this right now. Yeah, it's not so great fun, but it's like this, and I think that in that simile, you'll remember, of course, of the arrow and the poison on the arrow, and that sometime, studies like you've been hit by an arrow, but don't put any poison on the arrow. Of course, in terms of the bringing up more positive emotion, then recollection of the goodness and the kindness and the of teachers and benefactors, and how wonderful it is to have good friends sharing the same values and the same pursuits, and so bringing to mind all the goodness that is around us. I think mudita is just such an undervalued practice. It's not like positive thinking or just sort of that everything's wonderful, but again, looking and observing that whereas the news, the world that appears on our screens is 80-90% depressing, what goes on around us, particularly in the kind of communities that we live in, is 80-90% not depressing, quite the opposite. And the more sensitive you become to goodness and kindness, then it's just this constant drip, drip, drip of happiness, just opening our eyes to all the goodness and kindness, just every day. I'm not talking about like wow kind of acts of generosity and nobility, but just how we live together and how much we do for each other and how wonderful it is. So I think that's something that can really uplift the mind. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ajahn. So now we can open things up to questions. We've got a couple questions that have already started to come in. So one kind of cool thing which Ajahn Jayasaro does at his the high school where he goes to teach is that he goes around, there's like a Q&A pretty much most every week. And if the kids don't have questions, then he'll ask them a question. And we won't do that to you guys tonight, I don't think. But Chinchuan, do you want to?
We could have Ajahn Jayasaro ask a question, have everyone type in the chat box. That could get everyone engaged. Oh, so you can keep that in mind, Ajahn Jayasaro. If you want to ask us a question, you can do that, and I can see what people want to say.
Okay, I have a question because
really? Okay.
We won't have time right now, but I'm interested in how many words that we use in our daily discourse that we hardly ever stop and really consider what they mean. So I've been asking a lot of people, other monks as well, as what is respect? What does that mean? So one of my favorite intellectual exercises is I have a friend who comes to visit from Mars, and he's a kind of a blob. He doesn't have a body like we do, and he's incredibly intelligent, but knows absolutely nothing about human life, and he's very interested. So I give myself the task of explaining things to my friend from Mars. And my latest thing is respect. What does that mean? So that's my question for everyone, if anyone wants to ask that one. In the meantime, I'll answer your questions.
I can say I was quite impressed when I heard Ajahn Jayasaro went and taught he went to the high school every week, and he also went to the primary school. So he sits there with kindergartners, in a circle, and answers their questions, and hearing those stories.
Yeah, they're the best questions. Because they're the only time I get asked questions where I'm stumped, where I can't answer. Right? So there was a boy of 3 said, where did the first tree grow? The first tree in the world, where did it grow? So it's the first time for a long time I haven't been able to answer a question. Anyway.
Okay. I had one question came from Suna Center with Omar. Do you want to ask your question, Omar? Unmute yourself there.
Hello, Ajahn.
I can't see.
Where'd you go here?
I have to come close to the mic to speak.
Okay.
I wanted to. I was very intrigued when you said that you had this realization that Buddhism is the most complete and useful and effective system of education. I want to ask you how or what prompted this realization, or what was the reasoning behind it?
Well, I mean, since I first started to study Buddhism, a common theme is how difficult it is for people in a Western culture, particularly in a Christian or Islamic culture, to understand Buddhism. And often, yeah, is it a religion? It's not really a religion, it's a philosophy. Or is it, it's not a philosophy, it's a way of life, and all these kind of debates that go on. And I was interested in exactly why there is this kind of gap of comprehension and how difficult it is for people to understand Buddhism. And I realized it was because they were projecting onto it this idea that Buddhism is basically a belief system, and they believe in Jesus, for instance, and we believe in Buddha. And if you're a Buddhist, then you have these key things you have to believe in, like rebirth. So, and a Christian may say to a Buddhist, "Oh, you're a Buddhist. What do you believe in?" So, seeing things, everything in terms of belief and faith. Whereas, oh yes, okay, I can remember. After I'd been in Thailand for 6-7 years, I went back to England for the first time, and after visiting my parents, went with some monks back to a new branch monastery in the west of England. And we got off a train at about 10 o'clock at night, and we had like a 3 or 4 mile walk ahead of us. And suddenly a car stopped, and all these young people ran out of the car and ran towards us. And of course, I thought, oh dear, what's going to happen, you know? And then they surrounded us, and it turned out they were born again Christians. They weren't thugs or anything. And one of them just looked at me and he said, "What do you believe in?" And the interesting and funny thing was, I didn't know what to say. I said, maybe you ought to ask him. He's our senior monk. And this was when I first realized that I've given my whole life to practice of the Buddha Dhamma, and I'd never formulated it in terms of I believe in this or I believe in that. So that was when it became very clear to me. Again, very simply, the Eightfold Path, which is how we express our Buddhist identity through practicing the Eightfold Path, is abbreviated into what we call the Dry Sikha, which is the Threefold Training. And that word for training is, in fact, the same word in Thai that we use for education. So Sikha is the training, and in Thai language, education is Siksa. So that also like reinforced this sense of this is essentially a matter of training or education, rather than adopting a set of beliefs and trying to live one's life according to those beliefs.
Thank you, Tanajan. Thank you, Omar. We've got a question now from Tomas, BA student here at DRBU. I've heard you say in Dhamma Talk that you, quite a few years back, that one of your favorite pastimes was reading books that criticize Buddhism, like this one, and I'm curious about what benefit we can derive by coming into contact with things that are contrary to our spiritual paradigm, and what skills can you use to resolve conflicts of interpretation?
I would say that I don't recommend this to my students until they've been, certainly for the first few years, 5-10 years maybe, because you're learning a language and you're learning how to approach experience in terms of those tools that the Buddha gave us, whether it's the 4 elements, the five khandhas, or spiritual powers, or the threefold kinds of training. So you have to really be integrating these and learning how to be completely fluent in their use and using them as ways in which you look at the world. So it's a brainwashing in a positive sense, not in a kind of Manchurian candidate kind of way. But it's a re-education, if you like. But then you get to a certain point, and particularly if you're starting to have responsibilities in teaching others, or you're meeting people who have different views and don't see things the same way that you do, then I don't want to get into the I'm right and you're wrong kind of arrogance. And I find that it's also easy to get stale with things that you live with day in, day out, year after year, and being able to see these from slightly different perspectives, not necessarily critical, but just different way. And I found after number of years reading, say, Tibetan Buddhist texts, particularly, very stimulating. And so within Buddhist tradition, and as a Buddhist monk, also you're wanting to be able to create links and connections and friendships with people who come from different backgrounds. And you can't do that unless you have that kind of respect and interest in other ways of looking at life, and not just saying, well, yeah, this is it. I may feel that for myself, but I'm interested in how people who I feel are as intelligent, often more intelligent, significantly more intelligent, but have a very different ideas about life than I do, and that's very interesting to me.
Oh, wonderful. I see Jason. Would you be willing to ask your question next?
Yes. Thank you, Ajahn Jayasaro. The material you presented has been very rich. And so in particular, I had a question about the number 12 aspect of the different components, applying the mind skillfully, which is derived from Yannisar Manasikara, or wise reflection. And we have this element of learning, like in our pedagogy, that's kind of like it's even baked in our mission in terms of our learning is probing and deeply reflective. And in some ways, that leads to wisdom. So I wanted to inquire about kind of the mechanism that is in your school that is used to kind of like develop these aspects. I don't know, or anything else you could speak about this component. I think it's very rich.
Yes, again, the specifically Buddhist applications in terms of removal or alleviation of unwholesome ways of thinking and substituting them with wholesome ways of thinking, or wise reflection on the nature of the five khandhas, or of the terms of the three characteristics, reflecting on things in terms of the Four Noble Truths, taking things apart as in looking at the body in terms of 32 parts of the body, or the material in terms of four elements. These kinds of specifically Buddhist, or we could say spiritual applications of Yoniso Manasikara are not going to play a major role in daily life in a school, in a high school. Although there are, I think the Four Noble Truths is probably the one which is most integrated into the school, right from the primary school, in terms of what's the problem here, and what's the cause of the problem, and what's the solution, and what's the way that we can find towards the solution. So that way of sort of looking at problems is very much integrated into the schools. But looking at it in terms of what we're doing, what I'm involved in, which is grassroots and quite limited in terms of creating something that can be applied throughout the government public school system in this country, then it's somewhat circumscribed, because we're not just the kind of system where we're developing here is not specifically expressed in terms of curriculum or approach, but in terms of the relationship between parents, teachers, and children, and creating what we call a kalyana mitta community. So this idea of creating skillful communities, all of whom all the people involved, whether they are pupils, teachers, or parents, considering themselves as students, fellow students in different forms. So the thinking about this over the past few years and seeing the particular weaknesses of the Thai public school system, and it is rather particularly weak at the moment, is thinking skills and critical thinking skills. And so I started to look at different approaches to thinking skill development outside of Buddhist context. And the one that I came across and that we've been adapting in our schools over the past 2 or 3 years is the Harvard system, which is called Making Thinking Visible. And there's a lot of very useful thinking routines and thinking that we are integrating into the school. And the next phase is developing a thinking skill, critical thinking skill curriculum, beginning with the high school, and then we'll go on to the primary school, which we hope can be developed in such a way that the Ministry of Education might consider integrating into the public school system here.
Okay, thank you, Tanjan. We've got a question now from Simon. He's a DRBU student. Simon, are you unmuted?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Ajahn. Ajahn, my name is Simon. Thank you for sharing. And I think my question is kind of related to what you just described about, adding the element of critical thinking to the curriculum. Because I think science has kind of revolutionized everything, but at the same time can greatly objectify the world. So I myself, I recall sometimes when I was young, ask questions about what is truth, what is birth and death, So I guess as in this era, students are kind of inevitably encounter those questions. I think in addition to adding the critical thinking element, wondering how about your perspectives in regard to how Buddhism can help inform students of different way of thinking about the world. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Well, science education obviously is one part of school curriculum for sure. We've just built a new science building at the school here, the boarding school, and invited the Minister of Education to come and open this building. And on the side of the building, there's a handwritten, well, it's reproduced from my handwriting. Yeah, it's, I don't know how to translate it. It's like sort of the importance of science teaches us to know the world. Yeah, this is not such a good translation now, I think of it. But anyway, the point is that Buddhism teaches us to know the knower of the science. So knowing the world in a scientific paradigm is essential part of modern education for sure. And we want the world to be more fact-based, science-based than it is at the moment. But Buddhism is teaching about the one who, the scientist, is in. Science is based upon opinion. You can just forget about the scientist and just assume that there's a thing called objectivity, and the scientist is objective. So science generally makes all kinds of metaphysical assumptions about the scientist, and Buddhism questions those. So this is, I think, how it can complement science, as saying, well, yeah, but science is the conduct of human beings, and human beings have defilements, and human beings have capacity for enlightenment, more or less, objectivity, and so on. So one thing that I do say is that the Buddha said that the real world is not the world that we can find on our screens, but the real world is the world that appears at the sense doors, and that we need to be scientists of the real world, not just the world of symbols and concepts, but the real world of experience.
Great. I wanted to invite maybe Yuan Lin to ask a question. He's currently our associate dean of campus life, and then Jason, who just asked, is our I think residential coordinator. One of the things that is a little bit missing, you actually can't come to our campus, is we can't introduce you to all our different members of our administration, faculty, and staff. But that would be one thing. So Yuan Lin, would you like to ask your question? Can you unmute yourself?
Hi, Ajahn. I was wondering if you could speak to how the 12 skills are integrated into the curriculum at the school. In particular, curious how they are taught inside and outside the classroom, and how they're practiced by the students. And then if there's time, I was also wondering actually if you had any thoughts on how Buddhist education could help address some of the pressing issues facing the world. For example, climate change, mass extinction, which I think is very much related to this. I think emphasis on looking out at the so-called world without considering the knower.
Yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant, when presenting this approach and these ideas, and it can all seem, I hope, kind of inspiring and so on, but it's still hard work, and I can't say that there's a completely successful model there that I'm sort of displaying today and letting you appreciate. It's still in some areas still how the ideal, and when you've got in the boarding school here, you've got 120 teenagers going through puberty, and all the things and the dramas and the pressures and the of being a teenager, these and the pressures of work, and particularly in an Asian country, the expectations of family, and then for the younger ones, missing home, and so it's patchy, I would say, and I can't say that there's a successful model of integration, but it's there in potential, and we're trying to develop it more and more, and I see that it's becoming more and more successful. I definitely see like a progression, but it's I think having these virtues, it's more that they're there and trying to ensure that they're part of the conversation, that's just not something that's just left there on the wall, but teachers are bringing them into the way that they're talking to pupils, and pupils are including them in their self-assessment and in their relationships with parents and with other with teachers and pupils. The extent to which I can say that that's been a success, I can't really measure it. It's more that like this is what we're trying to do at the moment, and it's more my role to remind people and to bringing these things up. And as I say, ensuring that these kinds of unmeasurable qualities are not being drowned out by what can be measured, which I think is a big problem in education over the past many years, isn't it? That this quest for accountability and measurement has led to a diminution or weakening of all those elements of education which defy measurement. Returning again to the 4 areas of development, then we divide these further into 3 categories. So the relationship of the student to the material world begins with the physical body, and all that we need to learn about the physical body, and in terms of health and exercise and diet, sexual education, all things to do with the body, and then relationship to the material world directly around us with which we interact every day. And then the sort of the outer area is the environment. So we put quite a lot of emphasis in the school on the environment and the growing challenges and dangers, and questioning what we can do to make ourselves ready for this. So the environment is quite a big topic in the school. And then in the second area of education, the relationship to the social world, then apart from using customs and agreements and precepts as a way of creating healthy community, we're also giving importance to communication skill development, and to developing a wish and a passion for contributing to the wider society. So I think that these as values of the school and goals of the education, developing that tolerance and interest and respect for people of other backgrounds and belief systems, and wishing to contribute positively to the society. I think these are something you can do in this particular environment. As regards Buddhism in general, I'm someone who never accepts invitations to sort of conferences and to promote understanding between religions. I just find they're kind of waste of time and full of platitudes, and so I'm not very enthusiastic about religious dialogues. But I think that what Buddhism can offer is a humble approach. So the Buddha in the Chanki Sutta made this very, I think, absolutely crucial distinction. He said that it is possible to believe absolutely in something which is not true. So faith is not a proof that what you believe in is true. And I think in religious groups, there is this circular reasoning. It's true because I believe it because it's true. And so I think as Buddhists, we can say, well, look, let's be real here. And we'll say, like, okay, I'm a Buddhist. I believe in rebirth. But I don't know. I can't remember my past lives. So I don't know whether there is such a thing. I don't know that the Buddha was enlightened in India 2,500 years ago, but I believe it for these reasons. And then the Christian and the Jew, the Muslim, and they say, well, yeah, I don't know whether Jesus died on the cross for I believe it so, and this is why I believe it, but I don't actually know. And then the Muslim says he doesn't really know, she doesn't really know, but she believes. And so rather than saying all religions are teaching the same thing and we're all going the same path and just using different words, which I don't believe at all, and trying to find some kind of unity in some very high and unrealistic plane of being, I think we can find a really constructive unity in accepting the basic truth that nobody knows. You don't really know. And believing isn't the same as knowing. And so that's how I think that Buddhist wisdom would contribute to understanding between religions, starting off with making distinction between what you believe and what you know, according to the Buddhist teachings in the Janki Sutta.
All right. Possibly controversial material there. We only have 5 minutes left. Danjan, would you want to, I mean, being able to see, you know, the little squares of everyone who's here and maybe having gotten a sense of the questions we're asking, would you want to, I mean, kind of what you just said is kind of a summary, but would you have any kind of closing words that you want to add?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not so good on closing words. No, you say something.
Okay.
I just heard from our participants, people were texting me that Doug wanted to say something. Let me add him to our spotlight here. Okay, Doug, let me unmute you here. 1 second. Here you go. Okay, go.
Thank you very much. We really appreciated the opportunity. I just have one question, maybe in a couple minutes. The way that you're presenting Buddhism here is very close in a lot of ways to what we've been trying to do, both in the high schools, college, and so forth. In terms of, it seems like do you have quite a bit of time to work with your teachers to have a chance to meditate and work with them to have the inner workings of what you're describing? Because it seems like what you're doing for the students is give them an opportunity to experience their inner world of emotions and visceral responses, not so much an intellectual knowledge of something, but a feeling of something, and taking them through those feelings so they feel the good feelings, positive feelings, as an actual, their empirical evidence is their feelings for high school, you know, for younger kids, well, for anyone. But do you have quite a bit of time to work with your teachers so they can communicate that level of sensitivities and what they're doing around this material?
Can I just add one thing there? I just want to mention that Doug is actually our VP of Finance and Administration, technically, but he does everything at the university. So he helps counsel students, leads our contemplative exercise immersion, and I don't know, teaches a bunch of classes. So I just want to mention who Doug is, so give some context. So he's working actively with us. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I probably spend more time with teachers than with the pupils. So part of the agreement for any teacher who comes to work at the schools, they have to sign up for at least I do an annual 7-day meditation retreat, which everyone is compulsory for all the teachers here, and then there are other 1-day retreats which are also. There are a number throughout the year of which parents need to sign up for half of them, so they can choose. So needed to get everybody on board, the teachers and the pupil and the parents in particular, because if the teachers and we're teaching something at home at school and the parents are teaching something different at home, then obviously confusing for the children. When I go to the school on here on every Wednesday morning and twice a month to the school in Bangkok, then I'll spend a whole morning, which is divided into time with the pupils and time with teachers. So different groups of teachers and teachers with individual problems, whether they're problems at work, problems with their colleagues, or spiritual problems, meditation problems. I schedule interviews with teachers, both group interviews and personal interviews during the time I'm at school. Yeah. So yeah, I give great importance to the teachers. They really have to be the ones that are committed to this, because I'm there very rarely. I mean, I'm just more someone to give some moral and support and guidance every now and again. It's really up to the teachers.
Ajahn, it's been wonderful having you. It's been great seeing everyone who's come, friends from Thailand, lots of good people here in America. And Ajahn, if we could maybe pay respects one more time for anyone who's interested. Okay, call back.
Okay. Yeah, everyone.
Yeah, very much appreciate you being able to join us, Ajahn. It was quite inspiring to hear all the work you're doing with young people, especially for us. We've also trying to do the same work and seeing the depth of thought you put into it. And so
in a post-COVID world, whenever that manifests, then you or anyone from DRB are very welcome to come visit here. And as soon as next time I get to America, then I always go to Abhayagiri, so I'll scoot along to see you as well, if I may. Okay.
Oh yes, we'll be very happy to host you to come in. And appreciate everyone for showing up on a Monday night. I know students for sure are doing homework. That's probably a night you need to do reading for the rest of the week. And faculty are preparing for classes. So happy everyone could come out.